September 20th, 1942. Naval Air Station, North Island, San Diego, California. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders gripped the control stick of an aircraft that should not exist in American hands. His palms sweated despite the cool morning air rolling off the Pacific. The instrument panel before him displayed characters in Japanese. The controls felt foreign. The entire cockpit smelled of oil and unfamiliar materials. Beyond the windscreen, armed guards surrounded the hangar, their orders clear since the precious cargo arrived 3 weeks earlier. This was the most valuable aircraft in the world, and Sanders was about to become the first American to fly it. He released the brakes, and the Mitsubishi A6M2 Model 21-0 fighter rolled forward, its engine purring with surprising smoothness. Within minutes, this single test flight would expose weaknesses that would transform American fighter tactics and doom Japan's aerial supremacy. The secrets locked inside this captured machine would help create a weapon that would shoot down over 5,000 enemy aircraft and turn the tide of the Pacific War. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The transformation had begun not with this flight, but 5 months earlier, on a rain-soaked island in the Aleutians, where a young Japanese pilot made his final landing. June 4th, 1942. The same day, 300 miles to the east, American dive bombers were destroying 4 Japanese aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway, forever changing the course of the Pacific War. But in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, a smaller drama was unfolding that would prove equally transformative. 19-year-old Flight Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga launched his Zero fighter from the carrier Ryujo, part of a diversionary strike against the American base at Dutch Harbor. The morning mission went according to plan initially. Koga and his wingmen, Chief Petty, Officer Makoto Endo, and Petty Officer Tsuguo Shikada, attacked Dutch Harbor with devastating effect, shooting down an American PBY Catalina patrol bomber and strafing survivors in the water. The Zero performed exactly as designed, faster and more maneuverable than anything the Americans could field. Then, a single bullet changed everything. Ground fire from Dutch Harbor, likely from a .50 caliber machine gun, struck Koga's aircraft, severing the oil return line. In an engine dependent on precise lubrication, this was a death sentence. Oil began spraying from the damaged line, and Koga knew he had perhaps 15 minutes before the engine seized completely. He radioed his flight commander about the damage and turned toward Akutan Island, 25 miles east of Dutch Harbor, designated by Japanese planners as an emergency landing site. A submarine waited offshore to rescue downed pilots. As Koga approached Akutan Island, he spotted what appeared to be a perfect emergency landing field, a long stretch of flat grassland half a mile inland from Broadbight. His wingman circled above as Koga made his approach, landing gear extended for what should have been a routine, wheels-down landing. Shikada, flying overhead, suddenly noticed water glistening between the grass stalks on his second pass. He realized with horror that the field was actually a bog, the grass concealing knee-deep mud and standing water. He tried to radio a warning, but it was too late. Koga was already committed to his landing. The Zero's wheels touched the grass at approximately 80 miles per hour. For a brief moment, the landing seemed successful. Then the main gear sank into the soft mud beneath the vegetation, catching with tremendous force. Physics took over. The lightweight fighter, its tail still traveling at landing speed, flipped completely over in a violent cartwheel. The aircraft slammed upside down into the bog with bone-crushing impact. The force snapped Koga's neck instantly, killing him before he could draw another breath. His body remained suspended by his pogas. Seat belt in the inverted cockpit, his service pistol and samurai sword still strapped to his waist, his flight suit still pristine, except for the precise medical taping wrapped around his torso from previous injuries. Above, Koga's wingmen faced an agonizing decision. Standing orders required them to destroy any disabled Zero to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. They circled the crash site multiple times, machine guns ready, looking for any sign that their comrade had survived. The aircraft appeared so intact, sitting upside down in the marsh like a turtle on its back, that they could not bring themselves to fire. Perhaps Koga was alive, trapped, waiting for rescue. They could not murder their friend on the chance he might survive. After several more passes, their fuel running low, they reluctantly turned west and returned to the Ryujo. The submarine assigned to rescue, downed pilots searched the waters around Akutan for hours before the American destroyer USS Williamson drove it away. Koga's body and his Zero remained alone in the Aleutian wilderness, 5,000 miles from Japan, waiting to betray every secret of the Empire's most feared weapon. For 5 weeks, Koga's Zero sat undisturbed in the Akutan bog. The crash site lay out of sight of standard shipping lanes and aerial patrol routes, hidden in a small valley that received perhaps 6 days of clear visibility per month through the perpetual Aleutian fog. The aircraft carrier forces that might have searched for Koga had already retreated westward after the catastrophic defeat at Midway. The young pilot's fate became another casualty statistic in a war that was rapidly turning against Japan. Then, on July 10, 1942, an American PBY Catalina patrol bomber piloted by Lieutenant William Thies became lost. Navigation in the Aleutians was treacherous, with magnetic compasses unreliable near the Arctic Circle and landmarks obscured by near-constant fog. Thies had been navigating by dead reckoning when he spotted the Shumagin Islands through a break in the clouds. Recognizing his position, he corrected course for Dutch Harbour, choosing to fly directly over Akutan Island rather than around it to save time and fuel. Machinist mate Albert Knack, serving as plane captain, happened to glance down at precisely the right moment. Through a temporary gap in the fog, he spotted an unusual shape in the marsh below, something that did not belong in the Aleutian landscape. The bright red circles on the wings were unmistakable. Thies circled the site several times, noting the position carefully on his charts. The Zero appeared remarkably intact, a prize beyond imagination. He immediately returned to Dutch Harbour to report the discovery. Within hours, a recovery party landed near the crash site. What they found exceeded their wildest hopes. The Zero had landed in perhaps the only spot on Akutan Island where the bog was soft enough to cushion the impact, while being firm enough to prevent the aircraft from sinking. The marsh had acted like a giant shock absorber, dissipating the force that would have shattered the airframe on solid ground. Aside from a crushed windscreen, bent propeller tips, broken landing gear, and damaged wingtips, the aircraft was fundamentally intact. The recovery team carefully removed Koga's body from the cockpit and buried him with military honors on a hillside overlooking the crash site. They noted the extensive medical taping around his torso, suggesting previous injuries or precautionary measures against high acceleration maneuvers. His personal effects, including his pistol and sword, were removed as intelligence materials. Then began the challenging task of extracting a fighter aircraft from an Aleutian bog. The recovery operation took nearly 3 weeks of backbreaking labor in some of the most inhospitable conditions on Earth. Workers constructed a makeshift road using logs and planking, slowly winching the captured fighter across a half-mile of treacherous ground to Broad Bight, where it could be loaded onto a barge. The entire operation proceeded in perpetual damp cold, with equipment that froze or rusted overnight, but the prize was worth any hardship. By late July, the Zero had been loaded aboard a cargo ship for transport to the United States. The vessel carrying history's most important captured aircraft departed the Aleutians in early August, sailing south through waters that just weeks earlier had been contested by Japanese and American fleets. The captured Zero arrived in Seattle on August 1, 1942, transferred immediately to a barge for the journey to Naval Air Station North Island near San Diego. The aircraft reached San Diego in mid-August, where it was unloaded under heavy guard and moved to a secure hangar. 24-hour military police protection ensured no souvenir hunters could damage the invaluable prize. Word of the capture spread through Navy aviation circles with electric excitement. For the first time since the Zero's devastating debut at Pearl Harbor, American engineers and pilots would have the opportunity to examine the legendary fighter in detail. Navy Captain William Leonard, who would later command a carrier division in the Pacific, called it a treasure that unlocked so many secrets at a time when the need was so great. Marine Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Walsh, who would survive the war as an ace with 21 kills, would later state that knowing what to do with a zero on his tail, information that came directly from studying Koga's aircraft, saved his life several times. The race was on to restore the zero to flying condition as quickly as possible. Every day the aircraft remained grounded was another day American pilots faced an enemy they did not fully understand. The restoration team worked around the clock, carefully documenting every detail of the aircraft's construction while simultaneously repairing the crash damage. The work proceeded with astonishing speed, driven by urgency and the recognition that this single aircraft might hold the keys to winning the air war in the Pacific. The restoration revealed immediate insights into Japanese design philosophy. The Zero was built like a precision watch, one engineer noted, with flush rivets throughout the airframe and guns mounted flush with the wing surfaces to minimize drag. Every component was designed for minimum weight and maximum efficiency. The instrument panel displayed remarkable simplicity, with no superfluities to distract the pilot, just essential gauges arranged for instant readability. Inspection panels could be opened by simply pushing on marked spots with a finger, releasing internal latches. The entire aircraft could be disassembled and reassembled using minimal tools, a crucial advantage for field maintenance on primitive island bases. The team discovered that the Zero weighed between 5,300 and 6,100 pounds fully loaded, depending on ammunition, fuel load, and configuration, roughly 2,000 pounds lighter than the American F-4F Wildcat. This extraordinary weight savings came from multiple sources. The Zero lacked armor protection for the pilot, relying instead on superior maneuverability to avoid being hit. The fuel tanks were not self-sealing, trading safety for reduced weight and increased capacity. The airframe itself used minimum structural material, just enough strength for the anticipated loads with no safety margin. The Zero was fundamentally a different design philosophy than American fighters, where American aircraft prioritized pilot protection and structural ruggedness, accepting weight penalties for survivability. The Zero sacrificed protection for performance. It was a fighter designed to win through superior agility rather than absorbing punishment. The captured aircraft revealed other secrets. The engine, a 14-cylinder Nakajima Sakai radial producing approximately 950 horsepower, used a float-type carburetor that would prove significant in combat. The wings folded for carrier storage, using a simple manual mechanism requiring no hydraulic systems. The control surfaces were fabric-covered over metal frames to minimize weight. Most remarkably, the armament package was formidable for such a lightweight aircraft. Two 7.7mm machine guns firing through the propeller arc and two 20mm cannons mounted in the wings. By September 20th, just 41 days after arriving in San Diego, the Zero was ready to fly. The restoration team had replaced the crushed windscreen, straightened the vertical stabilizer and rudder, repaired the wingtips and flaps, and completely rebuilt the landing gear that had been sheared off in the crash. The original three-blade Sumitomo propeller was carefully dressed and reused. The captured aircraft was repainted, the red Japanese Hinomaru roundels covered with American blue circle and white star insignia. It looked like an American aircraft wearing Japanese clothes. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders, selected as chief test pilot for the project, had spent the previous week studying every aspect of the Zero while mechanics completed the restoration. He sat in the cockpit for hours, familiarizing himself with the Japanese instruments, memorizing the control layout, preparing mentally for a flight unlike any he had attempted. Sanders was an experienced test pilot, but he was about to fly an enemy aircraft whose flight characteristics could only be guessed from intelligence reports and combat observations. If those reports were accurate, the Zero was faster, climbed better, and turned tighter than any American fighter. If those reports were wrong, or if the captured aircraft had hidden damage, Sanders might not survive the first flight. On the morning of September 20th, 1942, Sanders climbed into the Zero's cockpit for the first time as pilot rather than student. Ground crew started the engine, which caught immediately and ran smoothly. The restoration team's work vindicated. Sanders taxied to the runway, conscious that dozens of engineers, intelligence officers, and Navy brass were watching from the tower and flight line. He advanced the throttle, and the Zero accelerated down the runway with surprising eagerness. The lightweight fighter lifted off, after a remarkably short ground roll, climbing at a rate that would have been impressive in any American aircraft. For the next hour, Sanders put the Zero through a series of performance tests, carefully exploring its flight envelope. He climbed to altitude, tested stall characteristics, practiced basic maneuvers, and felt out the aircraft's handling qualities. What he discovered in that first flight would change everything. Immediately apparent was the fact that the ailerons froze up at speeds above 200 knots, making rolling maneuvers at those speeds slow and requiring much force on the control stick, Sanders wrote in his report. The Zero rolled to the left much easier than to the right. The high-speed aileron problem was dramatic and unexpected. At low speeds, the Zero's maneuverability was everything Japanese pilots claimed, capable of turning inside any American fighter with ease. But above 200 knots, roughly 230 miles per hour, the ailerons became increasingly heavy and unresponsive. The fabric-covered control surfaces ballooned with air pressure at high speeds, requiring enormous stick force to overcome. American fighters, with their metal-covered control surfaces and hydraulic boost systems, maintained full control authority at all speeds. Sanders discovered a second critical weakness during negative acceleration maneuvers. When he pushed the stick forward sharply, inducing negative gravitational forces, the Zero's engine coughed and died. The float-type carburetor, designed for positive and zero-gravity conditions, could not maintain fuel flow during sustained negative acceleration. The engine would restart when positive acceleration resumed, but for several seconds, the Zero became a powerless glider. This weakness had profound tactical implications that Sanders recognized immediately. American pilots, being outmaneuvered and unable to escape a pursuing Zero, now had their answer. Sanders noted in his report, "Go into a vertical power dive, using negative acceleration if possible, to open the range while the Zero's engine was stopped by the forces involved. At about 200 knots, roll hard right before the Zero pilot could get his sights lined up." Sanders completed 24 test flights over the next 25 days, each one revealing additional details about the Zero's capabilities and limitations. He tested the aircraft at various altitudes, power settings, and combat configurations. He performed mock dogfights against American fighters with other test pilots flying F-4F Wildcats and newer aircraft. The data accumulated from these flights was extraordinary. The Zero's maximum speed was slightly less than the F-4F Wildcat, contrary to combat reports suggesting the Japanese fighter was faster. Sanders speculated this might be due to reconstruction weight, as the restoration team had been unable to source exact replacement materials for some components. However, the Zero's exceptional range, over 1,900 statute miles, far exceeded any American carrier fighter. The aircraft could remain airborne for over 6 hours, enabling it to escort bombers deep into enemy territory or patrol vast expanses of ocean. The Zero's rate of climb exceeded American fighters significantly, capable of reaching 20,000 feet faster than an F-4F could reach 15,000 feet. In turning combat at low speeds, the Zero could complete a full circle in time for American fighters to complete only 3/4 of a turn. These performance characteristics explained why early war combat had favored Japanese pilots so decisively. At low speeds and in turning fights, the Zero was simply superior to anything America fielded in late 1941 and early 1942. But Sanders' tests revealed that these advantages came with exploitable weaknesses. The Zero's light construction meant it could not withstand battle damage. Hits that would merely damage an American fighter often proved fatal to the Zero, which lacked armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. The Wright Field materials analysis of captured Zero components revealed aluminum alloys of excellent quality, but used in thicknesses American designers would consider inadequate. The Zero was built to minimum tolerances, with no safety margins for combat damage. Sanders' final report synthesized all the test data into actionable intelligence. American pilots should avoid slow speed, turning fights where the Zero's maneuverability dominated. Instead, they should use diving attacks utilizing the superior high-speed characteristics of American fighters. When a Zero pursued, American pilots should enter a steep dive, preferably with negative acceleration to kill the Zero's engine, then execute a hard right roll at high speed where the Zero could not follow. American fighters should use their superior armor and firepower to absorb hits while delivering devastating bursts that would destroy the fragile Zero. Team tactics should replace individual dogfighting, with wingmen covering each other and using coordinated attacks to negate the Zero's turning advantage. These recommendations were compiled and distributed throughout the fleet with unprecedented speed. Pilots preparing for combat received detailed briefings on the Zero's characteristics and how to exploit its weaknesses. The information was incorporated into training programs, with instructors teaching the high-speed dive and hard right roll technique to every new pilot. Combat veterans who had survived early encounters with Zeros suddenly understood what they had been fighting and how to win. The impact on pilot morale was profound. For 8 months, American naval aviators had faced an aircraft that seemed invincible, capable of outturning and outclimbing anything they flew. Pilots had developed a healthy respect for the Zero that bordered on fear. The official American tactic when jumped by Zeros had been simply to run away, a humiliating admission of inferiority. Now, for the first time, American pilots had concrete knowledge of how to fight the Zero and win. The mystique surrounding the Japanese fighter began to crumble. It was still a formidable opponent, but it was no longer invincible. It had weaknesses, and American pilots now knew exactly what those weaknesses were and how to exploit them. But the Akutan Zero's greatest contribution was not to tactical doctrine, it was to aircraft design, specifically to a fighter that was already under development when Koga crashed. In the Aleutians, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat would become the weapon that transformed American tactical knowledge into devastating combat results. The story of how the Hellcat came to be and how the Akutan Zero influenced its development would prove as important as Sander's test flights. The connection between the two aircraft has been subject to historical debate, with some claiming the Hellcat was designed based on the captured Zero, while others note the timeline makes direct influence impossible. The truth lies somewhere between a story of parallel development, timely intelligence, and Grumman's ability to incorporate lessons learned even as their fighter was entering production. January 1942. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, Bethpage, Long Island, New York. Leroy Grumman sat at his desk, reviewing preliminary designs for what would become the F-6F Hellcat, and the numbers troubled him. The Navy needed a fighter to replace the F-4F Wildcat, something faster and more powerful to counter the reports coming from the Pacific about Japanese air superiority. Grumman's design team, led by Chief Engineers Jake Swerbel and Bill Schwendler, had created what was essentially a larger, more powerful Wildcat. The design looked good on paper, but Grumman worried it might not be enough. The early months of 1942 brought increasingly alarming reports from the Pacific. American pilots were being outfought by Japanese Zeros at every encounter. The F-4F Wildcat, Grumman's current frontline fighter, was proving inadequate despite being a solid, well-built aircraft. Combat reports indicated the Zero could outclimb, outturn, and outrange the Wildcat in nearly every performance category. Something dramatically better was needed, and needed urgently. Grumman's initial F-6F, designated XF-6F1, was planned around the Wright R-2000, 600 Cyclone engine producing 1,700 horsepower. This would give the new fighter more power than the Wildcat's 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-1830. But Grumman questioned whether it was enough of an improvement. The company had been developing the XF-6F1 since mid-1941, with the formal contract signed on June 30th, 1941, nearly a year before Koga's Zero crashed in the Aleutians. The design work proceeded rapidly through early 1942, driven by urgent Navy requirements and Grumman's recognition that the Pacific War would be won or lost in the air. The Bureau of Aeronautics worked closely with Grumman engineers, incorporating feedback from combat pilots returning from the Pacific. On April 22, 1942, 6 weeks before the Battle of Midway and 7 weeks before Koga's crash, Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare visited Grumman's Bethpage facility. O'Hare, fresh from combat operations, in which he had single-handedly defended the carrier Lexington against Japanese bombers, earning the Medal of Honor, met with Grumman engineers to discuss the F-4F Wildcat's performance against the Zero. His insights were sobering. The Zero was faster than American intelligence had estimated, climbed better than seemed physically possible for its engine power, and could turn inside the Wildcat with ease. O'Hare emphasized that American fighters needed more power, better climb rate, and improved visibility for the pilot. The day before meeting with Grumman engineers, O'Hare had met with President Franklin Roosevelt during the Medal of Honor presentation ceremony. The president asked what was needed in a new naval fighter. O'Hare's response was direct and memorable. "A plane that will go upstairs faster." Bureau of Aeronautics, Lieutenant Commander A.M. Jackson, working closely with Grumman, directed specific design changes based on combat experience. Jackson emphasized mounting the cockpit higher in the fuselage, with the forward fuselage sloping down slightly to the engine cowling, giving the pilot excellent visibility over the nose. He stressed to Grumman engineers that you cannot hit them if you cannot see them. These changes were incorporated into the XF-6F design before Koga's Zero was even discovered. On April 26, 1942, 5 weeks before Koga's final flight, the Bureau of Aeronautics made a critical decision that would define the F-6F's character. Based on combat accounts from the Pacific and O'Hare's recommendations, Buair directed Grumman to install a more powerful engine in the second XF-6F prototype. The Wright R2600 was abandoned in favor of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower. This was the same engine being used in the Vought F-4U Corsair and Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and it represented a 50% increase in power over the original XF-6F1 design. Grumman complied by redesigning and strengthening the F-6F airframe to handle the more powerful engine. The change required modifications to the engine mount, cooling system, and structural components throughout the aircraft. It meant delays in the development schedule, but the performance gains would be worth it. Grumman estimated the new power plant would increase performance by 25% over the original design. The engine change decision came from multiple factors converging simultaneously. The R2800 had proven reliable in testing and was entering production for other aircraft programs. Pratt & Whitney could provide engines without the delays plaguing the Wright R2600 development. Most importantly, combat reports indicated that incremental improvements would not be sufficient. American fighters needed a quantum leap in performance to match or exceed the Zero's capabilities. The first XF-6F1 prototype, still fitted with the Wright R2600 Cyclone engine, made its maiden flight on June 26, 1942, with test pilot Bob Hall at the controls. This was 8 days before Koga crashed in the Aleutians and 6 weeks before the Zero was discovered. The prototype performed well, demonstrating good handling characteristics and no serious vices, but its performance with the 1,700 horsepower, Cyclone confirmed Grumman's concerns that more power was needed. The second prototype, designated XF-6F3 and fitted with the 2,000 horsepower R2800 double Wasp, first flew on July 30, 1942. This was 20 days after the Akutan Zero was discovered, but 2 months before it would be restored to flying condition and tested. The XF-6F3's performance exceeded expectations. The additional power transformed the design, giving it the climb rate and speed needed to compete with the Zero on equal terms. But the Hellcat's development did not stop there. Throughout the summer of 1942, Grumman engineers continued refining the design based on ongoing combat reports and intelligence from the Pacific. When the Akutan Zero arrived in San Diego in mid-August, Detailed technical data began flowing to the Bureau of Aeronautics and Grumman within days. The captured aircraft had not yet flown, but physical examination revealed crucial information about its construction, weight, armament, and design philosophy. This intelligence arrived at a critical moment in the F-6F's development. The basic design was set, the engine selected, and the first prototypes flying, but production had not yet begun, meaning changes could still be incorporated relatively easily. Grumman engineers studied the Zero data with intense interest, looking for ways to ensure their fighter could not just match but exceed the Japanese aircraft's capabilities. The Zero weighed between 5,300 and 6,100 pounds fully loaded. The F-6F would weigh over 12,000 pounds. This enormous weight penalty, more than double the Zero's weight, had to be compensated by additional power and intelligent design. Grumman's philosophy differed fundamentally from the Japanese approach, where the Zero sacrificed protection for performance. The F-6F would provide both. Roy Grumman, the company's founder, made a key decision after studying the Zero data. He determined that Grumman could match or surpass the Zero, in most respects, without sacrificing pilot armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and robust fuselage structure. The F-6F would compensate for the extra weight with additional power from the R2800 engine. This decision shaped everything that followed. The F-6F would be built tough, capable of absorbing battle damage that would destroy a Zero. It would protect its pilot with armor, plate behind the seat, and bulletproof windscreen. It would carry self-sealing fuel tanks that could take hits without catastrophic fires. It would have redundant systems and robust structure capable of withstanding hard carrier landings and combat damage. The weight penalty would be overcome by raw power and intelligent design that made the most of available performance. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The data from the Akutan Zero, combined with combat reports and Sanders' test flights in September and October, influenced specific design decisions as the F-6F moved toward production. The F-6F's wings were designed for high-speed performance, using a different airfoil and control surface design than the Wildcat. The ailerons were hydraulically boosted and metal-covered, ensuring full control authority at all speeds. This directly addressed the high-speed aileron problems Sanders discovered in the captured Zero. The F-6F would be able to roll effectively at speeds where the Zero's controls locked up. The F-6F's fuel system used a pressure carburetor rather than the float type used in the Zero. This ensured the engine would continue running under negative acceleration, eliminating the weakness Sanders had exploited in his test flights. An F-6F pilot could dive away from a pursuing Zero without his engine quitting at the crucial moment. The F-6F structure was designed to handle 9G positive and 6G negative acceleration, far exceeding the Zero's structural limits. This meant F-6F pilots could use aggressive maneuvers without fear of structural failure, while Zeros attempting to follow would risk breaking up. The armament package was increased to 6 50-caliber machine guns compared to the Wildcat's 4. Later versions would offer the option of 2 20mm cannons and 4 50-caliber guns. The concentrated firepower could destroy the lightly built Zero with short bursts, while the F-6F's armored structure could absorb return fire. Visibility from the cockpit was exceptional, with the raised pilot position providing clear views in all directions. This addressed Jackson's emphasis that pilots could not shoot what they could not see. The design incorporated lessons from the Thatch weave and other defensive tactics, recognizing that visibility was crucial for mutual support between wingmen. On October 3, 1942, the first production F-6F3 made its maiden flight, just 2 weeks after Sanders completed his initial test flights in the Akutan Zero. The timing was not coincidental. Production had been deliberately delayed until engineers could incorporate the latest intelligence. The myth that the F-6F was designed based on the Akutan Zero is demonstrably false, given that the basic design predated Koga's crash and the engine change decision came before the Zero was even discovered. But the Timing allowed Grumman to refine the F-6F's final configuration based on knowledge gained from the captured aircraft, incorporating tactical lessons before production ramped up. The first production F-6 F-3 seconds began reaching fleet squadrons in early 1943. Fighting Squadron 9 received the first operational Hellcats in February 1943, embarking on the carrier Essex for training and workup. The pilot's reaction to the new fighter was enthusiastic. After months of fighting in F-4F Wildcats, struggling against superior Japanese aircraft, the F-6F felt like a quantum leap in capability. It was faster, climbed better, had more firepower, better visibility, and felt solid in a way the Wildcat never had. Pilots quickly discovered the F-6F was remarkably easy to fly. Grumman had designed it specifically to be operated by relatively inexperienced pilots, fresh from training, recognizing that wartime expansion would flood the fleet with newly minted aviators. The F-6F had no bad habits, no tricky characteristics that could kill an unwary pilot. It was stable, predictable, and forgiving of mistakes. Carrier landings, the most challenging aspect of naval aviation, were straightforward in the Hellcat. The robust landing gear absorbed hard impacts that would have collapsed lesser aircraft. The visibility allowed pilots to precisely judge their approach. The controls remained responsive at the low speeds required for carrier approaches. Production ramped up with astonishing speed. Grumman built a new factory at Bethpage specifically for F-6F production, with the first aircraft rolling off the line before the factory buildings were even completed. At peak production in 1944, Grumman produced 644 aircraft in a single month, 1 Hellcat per hour, an aircraft production record never equaled. The scale was staggering. Each F-6F required approximately 20,000 individual parts sourced from hundreds of subcontractors. The Pratt & Whitney engines were built in 3 separate factories and shipped to Bethpage for installation. Grumman coordinated this industrial symphony with precision that amazed observers. Much of the credit went to Jake Swerbel, Grumman's production genius, who organized the workflow and supply chain with unprecedented efficiency. Many Grumman workers had never built aircraft before, yet they produced the most successful carrier fighter of the war. Between the first production flight in October 1942 and the end of the war in November 1945, a span of approximately 37 months, Grumman would produce 12,275 F-6F Hellcats from a single factory complex. The F-6F made its combat debut on August 31, 1943, 15 months after the Akutan Zero was discovered and 11 months after Sanders' first test flight. Aircraft from Fighting Squadrons 5 and 9, operating from carriers, Yorktown and Independence, attacked Marcus Island as part of a carrier raid. The mission was an overwhelming success. No Japanese fighters managed to get airborne, and several were destroyed on the ground. 2 Hellcats were lost to anti-aircraft fire, but in air-to-air combat, the F-6F demonstrated immediate superiority. Over the following months, the F-6F became the standard fighter on American fleet carriers, gradually replacing the F-4F Wildcat on the large carriers, while Wildcats continued serving on smaller escort carriers. By early 1944, the Hellcat equipped 15 carrier fighter squadrons and was rapidly becoming the dominant American naval fighter in the Pacific. The tactical lessons learned from the Akutan Zero were incorporated into every aspect of F-6F operations. Pilots were trained to avoid slow-speed turning fights unless they had significant altitude or numbers advantage. Instead, F-6F doctrine emphasized high-speed slashing attacks, diving from altitude to build speed, making a single firing pass, then zooming back to altitude before the more maneuverable Zeros could respond. The Thach Weave, developed by Lieutenant Commander John Thach, even before the Zero was captured, became standard defensive doctrine for all F-6F squadrons. When jumped by Zeros, F-6F pilots flew in mutually supporting pairs, weaving back and forth so that any Zero pursuing one F-6F would immediately face head-on fire from the other. The tactic neutralized the Zero's turning advantage by forcing the Japanese pilot to either break off or face a head-on engagement, where the F-6F's superior firepower and protection dominated. Pilots were taught to use their speed and power to dictate engagement terms. If the tactical situation favored the F-6F, engage. If not, use superior speed to disengage, reposition, and attack from advantage. The F-6F's climb rate allowed it to regain altitude quickly after diving attacks. Its speed allowed it to escape from unfavorable situations. Its endurance allowed it to patrol longer and chase fleeing enemies farther than BRV Zeros could follow. November 23, 1943. Gilbert Islands. F-6F Hellcats from carrier Essex engaged Japanese Zero fighters over Tarawa in what would become the first major test of the new fighter against Japan's best. 30 Zeros rose to intercept the American strike, and the ensuing dogfight raged across the skies over the invasion beaches. When the smoke cleared, American pilots claimed 30 Japanese fighters destroyed for the loss of a single F-6F. The Battle of Tarawa demonstrated everything the F-6F was designed to accomplish. American pilots, many of them relatively inexperienced, had met veteran Japanese aviators flying Zeros and crushed them utterly. The combination of superior aircraft performance, sound tactics based on knowledge of the Zero's weaknesses, and intensive training had created an unbeatable formula. The battle's outcome sent shockwaves through both American and Japanese commands. For the Americans, it validated the F-6F's design and the tactical doctrines developed from studying the Akutan Zero. For the Japanese, it revealed that American aircraft had caught up to and surpassed the Zero's capabilities. The age of Japanese air superiority was ending, but Tarawa was just the beginning. The F-6F would prove its worth in every major engagement across the Pacific for the next 20 months, compiling the most dominant combat record of any American fighter in World War II. June 19, 1944, Philippine Sea, west of the Mariana Islands. F-6F Hellcats from 15 American aircraft carriers, 7 large fleet carriers, and 8 light carriers of Task Force 58, prepared to face the largest Japanese carrier aviation force assembled since the Battle of Midway 2 years earlier. The Japanese had 9 aircraft carriers and sent wave after wave of aircraft to destroy the American invasion fleet attacking Saipan. What followed became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the most one-sided aerial battle in naval history. The first Japanese strike, 69 aircraft, lost 42 planes before reaching the American fleet. The remaining 27 that penetrated to the carriers accomplished nothing while facing a storm of anti-aircraft fire and swarming F-6Fs. The second wave, 107 Japanese aircraft, lost 97 before they could even attack. Japanese carrier aviation was being systematically destroyed. Throughout the day, Japanese carriers launched 370 aircraft in multiple strikes. Only 130 returned. The F-6F Hellcats, flying combat air patrol over the American fleet and hunting Japanese strike groups, shot down the vast majority. American losses totaled 23 to 30 aircraft, with many pilots rescued from the ocean. The strategic impact was catastrophic for Japan. The carrier air groups painstakingly rebuilt after the losses at Midway were annihilated. The experienced pilots who had trained the current generation were dead. The aircraft that had been hoarded for the decisive battle were gone. Japanese naval aviation would never recover from this single day's losses. The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrated the F-6F operating at peak effectiveness. The aircraft's exceptional endurance allowed continuous combat air patrols over the fleet. Its climb rate ensured F-6Fs could intercept incoming strikes at optimal altitude. Its speed allowed pursuit of fleeing Japanese aircraft. Its firepower and protection meant that in any head-to-head engagement, the F-6F held overwhelming advantage. But perhaps most importantly, the F-6F's easy handling meant that even relatively inexperienced American pilots could operate the aircraft effectively in combat. By mid-1944, the United States was producing pilots far faster than Japan, and the F-6F allowed these new aviators to be thrown into combat with confidence they could survive and succeed. Japanese pilots, by contrast, were receiving increasingly abbreviated training as fuel shortages and instructor losses mounted. By late 1944, Japanese pilots were entering combat with perhaps one-third the flight hours American pilots received. The experience differential, combined with the F-6F's technical superiority, created a death spiral for Japanese aviation. Every engagement cost Japan irreplaceable pilots, while American losses were quickly replaced by the training pipeline that was producing thousands of new aviators annually. The F-6F's contribution to American victory extended beyond aerial combat. The aircraft was adapted into multiple specialized variants that addressed specific tactical needs. The F-6 F-3 Newtons and F-6 F-5 Newtons night fighter variants carried radar equipment in a pod mounted on the starboard wing, allowing them to intercept Japanese night bombing raids. The radar reduced top speed slightly, but night fighter pilots found the capability worth the trade-off. F-6F night fighters achieved remarkable success against Japanese night raiders, shooting down bombers that had previously attacked with impunity under cover of darkness. The F-6 F-3P and F-6 F-5P photographic reconnaissance variants replaced guns with cameras, conducting crucial reconnaissance missions over enemy territory. Their speed and range allowed them to penetrate deep into Japanese-held areas, photograph targets, and escape before interceptors could respond. Later F-6, F-5 variants were modified to carry 2,000-pound bombs on a centerline rack and rocket rails under the wings, transforming the fighter into a highly effective fighter bomber. F-6Fs, armed with bombs and rockets, provided devastating close air support for Marine and Army forces fighting across Pacific Islands, attacking Japanese bunkers, artillery positions, and troop concentrations with precision that artillery could not match. By the end of World War II, F-6F Hellcats had compiled statistics that remain unmatched by any other American fighter. The aircraft was credited with destroying 5,163 enemy aircraft in Pacific air-to-air combat by United States Navy and Marine Corps pilots, with an additional 60 aircraft destroyed in other theaters, bringing the total to 5,223, when including British Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm victories. Only 270 F-6Fs were lost in air-to-air combat, giving the aircraft an overall kill-to-loss ratio of 19-1. Against Japanese Zeros specifically, the ratio was 13-1. These numbers reflected the combined impact of superior aircraft performance, sound tactical doctrine derived from studying the Akutan Zero, and increasingly skilled American pilots facing declining Japanese opposition. The F-6F produced more fighter aces than any other Allied aircraft of World War II. Between 305 and 307 Navy Hellcat pilots achieved ace status with 5 or more victories, with slight variations in counts depending on how shared kills were attributed. The Navy's top ace, Commander David McCampbell, scored all 34 of his victories flying F-6Fs. The Hellcat's combat record was so dominant that late-war Japanese pilots developed what American intelligence called zero fatigue, a recognition that engaging F-6Fs was likely to be fatal. Japanese pilots increasingly avoided combat when possible, diving away or fleeing into clouds rather than fighting. This psychological dominance was as important as the technical superiority, as it allowed American carrier groups to operate with near impunity, knowing Japanese air opposition would be minimal and ineffective. The contrast with early war combat was stark. In 1942, American pilots had fled from Zeros whenever possible. By 1945, Japanese pilots were fleeing from Hellcats. The transformation was complete. The Akutan Zero's role in this transformation cannot be precisely quantified, but its importance is undeniable. The captured aircraft provided the first detailed intelligence on the Zero's capabilities and limitations. Sanders' test flights revealed specific weaknesses that could be exploited tactically. The technical data influenced F-6F design decisions at a crucial moment when changes could still be incorporated. Most importantly, the Akutan Zero destroyed the mystique surrounding the Japanese fighter, proving it was not invincible, but rather an aircraft with specific strengths and specific weaknesses. The combination of the F-6F Hellcat and the tactical knowledge gained from the Akutan Zero created a synergy that transformed American naval aviation. The F-6F was not designed because of the Akutan Zero, but it was refined based on intelligence from the captured aircraft. The tactics American pilots used were not created by studying the Zero, but they were validated and formalized by Sanders' test flights and subsequent analysis. The result was an integrated system of aircraft, tactics, training, and industrial production that overwhelmed Japanese aviation. By war's end, Japan had produced approximately 10,500 Zeros, their primary fighter throughout the conflict. The United States produced 12,275 F-6F Hellcats in 37 months, plus thousands of F-4U Corsairs and other fighters. The production differential reflected America's industrial might, but the combat differential reflected the F-6F's technical superiority and the tactical doctrine that employed it effectively. The Akutan Zero was destroyed in February 1945, ironically, in a training accident rather than combat. While taxiing for takeoff at Naval Air Station North Island, an SB-2C Helldiver dive bomber lost control and crashed into the parked Zero, its propeller slicing the takeoff Japanese fighter into pieces. William Leonard salvaged several gauges from the wreckage, donating them to the National Museum of the United States Navy. The Alaska Heritage Museum and Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum also preserved small pieces. The physical aircraft was gone, but its legacy lived on in every F-6F that flew combat missions, in every American pilot who knew the Zero's weaknesses, in every tactical manual that incorporated lessons learned from Sanders' test flights. Koga's body, initially buried on Akutan Island, was exhumed by American Graves Registration Service teams in 1947 and reburied on Adak Island, further down the Aleutian chain. In 1953, the Adak Cemetery was excavated and 236 bodies, likely including Koga's remains, were returned to Japan for burial. The young pilot who died at age 19 became an unwitting contributor to Japan's defeat, his perfectly preserved aircraft revealing secrets that would doom thousands of his countrymen. The historical debate about the Akutan Zero's importance continues. Some historians argue it was the single most important intelligence capture of the Pacific War, more valuable than code-breaking or any other source. Others contend that American victory was inevitable regardless, and the Zero's capture merely accelerated trends already underway. Japanese historian and Air Self-Defense Force Lieutenant General Masatake Okumiya, who flew as a staff officer in most major Pacific carrier battles, stated that the acquisition of the Akutan Zero was no less serious than the Japanese defeat at Midway. The Zero's secrets being revealed to American engineers and test pilots represented a catastrophic intelligence failure whose consequences rippled throughout the remaining war years. Fighter ace William Leonard called the captured Zero a treasure that unlocked so many secrets at a time when the need was so great. Marine ace Kenneth Walsh credited intelligence from Koga's Zero with saving his life several times, the tactical knowledge allowing him to survive early encounters that might otherwise have been fatal. The truth likely incorporates elements of all these perspectives. The Akutan Zero was not solely responsible for American victory, which rested on industrial capacity, code-breaking, submarine warfare, and numerous other factors. But it was a crucial piece of the puzzle, arriving at exactly the right moment to influence aircraft design decisions and tactical doctrine development. Without the Akutan Zero, the F-6F would still have been an excellent fighter. American industry would still have overwhelmed Japan's production, and American victory would likely have been achieved, but the process might have taken longer, cost more American lives, and involved greater uncertainty about how to defeat the Zero's capabilities. The 19-to-1 kill ratio represented the culmination of multiple factors converging perfectly: superior aircraft design that prioritized both performance and pilot protection, tactical doctrine derived from studying the enemy's capabilities and weaknesses, training that prepared pilots for the realities of combat, industrial production that ensured numerical superiority, and crucially, detailed intelligence about the enemy's primary weapon gained from a single, nearly intact example captured by chance in the Aleutian wilderness. American servicemen who flew F-6F Hellcats during the war gathered at various reunions over the decades following World War II. Many were F-6F Hellcat, pilots who had dominated the skies over the Pacific, now sharing their memories and honoring fallen comrades. The speakers at these gatherings repeatedly referenced the Akutan Zero and the intelligence it provided. They spoke of how knowing the Zero's weaknesses had given them confidence in combat. They described using the high-speed dive and hard right roll technique Sanders had discovered. They explained how the F-6F's design incorporated lessons learned from the captured Japanese fighter. Veterans consistently emphasized a common theme. "We were told the Zero was invincible," one former fighter ace explained. "We believed it because we had seen what it could do to our aircraft in early combat. Then we learned its secrets from the captured plane in Alaska. We learned it could not roll at high speed. We learned its engine quit under negative acceleration. We learned it was fragile and would burn if hit. And suddenly it was no longer invincible. It was just another aircraft, one we could beat if we flew smart. The F-6F gave us the tools. The Akutan Zero gave us the knowledge. Together, they gave us victory." The F-6F Hellcat remained in frontline service through the end of World War II, gradually being supplemented by the F-4U Corsair as that aircraft's carrier landing problems were resolved. After the war, Hellcats were quickly phased out of fleet service, replaced by jets and more modern propeller fighters. Many went to reserve squadrons where they served into the early propeller fleet, 1950s. Others were converted to target drones or scrapped. The last Navy Hellcat was retired in 1954, just 9 years after the war ended. The rapid obsolescence was testament to how quickly aviation technology advanced during and after World War II. An aircraft that was state-of-the-art in 1943 was hopelessly outdated by 1954, unable to compete with jets that flew twice as fast and climbed 3 times as quickly. But the Hellcat's combat record ensured it would never be forgotten. Museum displays across the United States feature preserved F-6Fs, many restored to flying condition. Airshow crowds watch with awe as vintage Hellcats perform, their distinctive sound and profile evoking an era when American naval aviation achieved dominance through a combination of engineering excellence and tactical brilliance. Approximately 70 F-6F Hellcats survive in museums and private collections worldwide. 7 remain airworthy, all based in the United States, regularly flown at airshows and commemorative events. Each flight is a reminder of the 12,000 aircraft that rolled off Grumman's assembly lines, the 34,000 pilots who flew them in combat, and the 5,000 enemy aircraft they destroyed. The Akutan Zero itself lives on only in fragments scattered across museums and in thousands of pages of test reports and intelligence analyses archived in the National Archives. But its impact on the Pacific War far exceeded its physical presence. A single aircraft, captured by chance, tested for a few months, and destroyed in an accident, contributed to American victory in ways that can never be precisely measured, but can never be dismissed. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders, the test pilot who first flew the Akutan Zero, lived to see the F-6F's combat success. He continued serving in various aviation test and evaluation roles throughout the war, contributing to development programs for multiple aircraft types. After the war, he retired from the Navy and worked in the aerospace industry. His expertise in aircraft testing valuable in the rapid technological advancement of the post-war era. He passed away in the 1970s, having witnessed the complete transformation of naval aviation from propeller fighters to supersonic jets. Sanders rarely spoke publicly about his role in testing the Akutan Zero, considering it simply one assignment among many in a career devoted to naval aviation. But those who served with him recognized the importance of his work. His careful test flights, detailed reports, and analytical insights had contributed directly to American tactical doctrine and indirectly to F-6F design decisions. He was a quiet professional who did his job superbly at a moment when it mattered most. The broader lesson from the Akutan Zero and F-6F Hellcat story extends beyond World War II. Modern military forces spend billions on intelligence, gathering, technical analysis, and threat assessment because the Akutan Zero example proved how valuable detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities can be. Every captured enemy aircraft, every defector who brings technical information, every intelligence source that reveals enemy weaknesses is, potentially another Akutan Zero, a key that unlocks tactical and technological advantages. Understanding your enemy's capabilities and limitations can mean the difference between victory and defeat. A single piece of hardware, properly analyzed and exploited, can influence the design of weapon, systems, the development of tactics, and the outcome of battles. The Akutan Zero arrived at precisely the moment when it could influence F-6F development. Sanders' test flights revealed weaknesses at exactly the time when pilots needed confidence to face the Zero. The tactical lessons were distributed when training programs could incorporate them. A year earlier or later, the impact might have been minimal. The timing was perfect, and America exploited it fully. The Zero in 1942 was arguably the world's best carrier fighter, superior in many respects to anything America fielded. But America's ability to produce thousands of F-6Fs, train tens of thousands of pilots, and sustain combat operations across an ocean gave it advantages the Zero's technical excellence could not overcome. Quality matters, but quantity has a quality of its own, especially when combined with tactical intelligence and sound doctrine. The F-6F Hellcat and the Akutan Zero represent two sides of this equation. The Hellcat was the product of American industrial might, engineering skill, and tactical intelligence synthesis. The Akutan Zero was fortune's gift to American intelligence, a stroke of luck that revealed crucial information about the enemy's capabilities. Together they created a combination that proved unstoppable, transforming American naval aviation from defensive inferiority in early 1942 to overwhelming dominance by mid-1944. The young Japanese pilot who died in an Aleutian bog could not have known that his perfectly preserved fighter would contribute to his nation's defeat. His wingmen, hoping he survived, could not have known that their mercy in not destroying his aircraft would doom thousands of their comrades. The American salvage crews struggling in that Alaskan marsh could not have known they were recovering the key to air superiority in the Pacific. And Eddie Sanders, taxiing that captured Zero for its first American flight, could not have fully appreciated that his test flights would influence a fighter that would help win the war. But history is made by such moments, when chance and preparation intersect, when fortune favors those ready to exploit it, when a single piece of intelligence arrives at exactly the right time to influence events far beyond its apparent significance. The Akutan Zero was such a moment, and the F-6F Hellcat was its legacy. One captured aircraft, one skilled test pilot, one moment in time when intelligence, design, and tactical doctrine converged to create a weapons system that achieved a 19-to-1 kill ratio and swept Japanese aviation from Pacific skies. The transformation of American naval aviation from underdog to dominant force happened through the convergence of industrial capacity, engineering excellence, skilled pilots, and intelligence. The Akutan Zero revealed that the seemingly invincible Japanese fighter had exploitable weaknesses. The F-6F Hellcat was designed and employed to exploit those weaknesses ruthlessly. When American pilots took F-6F Hellcats into combat, they carried with them not just superior technology, but superior knowledge. They knew the Zero's weaknesses because Eddie Sanders had discovered them. They knew how to exploit those weaknesses because tactical doctrine had been rewritten based on Sanders' test flights. They knew they could win because the mystique of Japanese invincibility had been shattered by hard data from the captured aircraft. The 19-to-1 kill ratio was the inevitable result, a testament to what can be achieved when chance provides opportunity and skill transforms that opportunity into overwhelming advantage. The story of how one captured Zero influenced American fighter development and created the F-6F Hellcat's dominance demonstrates that warfare is decided not just by courage and firepower, but by intelligence, adaptation, and the ability to learn from the enemy. The F-6F Hellcat and the Akutan Zero together, wrote a chapter in aviation history that continues to resonate 8 decades later, proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not through destruction, but through understanding. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.